Well, good morning. I had to restart this because the beans boiled over. And I was sitting here talking away and I could smell the beans boiling. Well, I knew it would never do to let those things boil for an hour, so I got up and turned the heat down on it. But good morning. Beautiful day here. Coffee is just excellent. Well, yesterday we kind of left the story with Mac reminiscing about stuff that had happened years ago, and he thought that Marie used to be introverted, and he wondered when that had changed. Well, the story sort of bounces around a little bit in a timeline, but that's okay. It kind of keeps you wondering where I'm going to go next. And because of the title of this story, which is pretty descriptive, the title is called Time and Other Delights. Well, my agent called about 6 months after 6 months being in Kyoto and asked if I had located the translator in the basement of my house. I told him that I was so busy starting my life with Seuss and Shin and Mary and Mitsuko that I hadn't even looked. I told him I would look for it in the morning. Well, morning came, and after breakfast and seeing Seuss and Mitsuko going shopping, I headed for the basement. I spotted the characteristic double door in the wall of one of the back storage rooms. The path was cleared to it in a zigzag fashion that, with the stored items piled here and there, was very near impossible to see from the doorway with the subdued lighting. I opened the door and found the wall unit, which opened the doorway to the actual translator. I stepped in and closed the door. The lights had come on with the spotlight shining on the control panel. I saw it was set to normal 0 time, Earth -2, and hit the enable button. I stepped out into the translator in a big house in Stag Hammer. I opened the door and found Cheyenne, Mark, Pinky, Sharon, Shelley, and Gracie standing there. Well, I saw Mark off, and then I had a great visit for close to a month, and decided I should get back to Kyoto, and one morning right after a hearty Gracie repast, headed for the basement in Earth plus 23. For the first 2 years, I went back to Earth -2 every few weeks. Had a nice interlude with my family there. Then there was a period of 3 years I didn't go at all. I was comfortable in my shoes. Shin was demonstrating why Prime had considered him one of the subjects to keep an eye on. Mary was ultra low-key about her position in my house there with Seuss and Mitsuko, all keeping Shin healthy and coaching him in some of his forgotten social graces, as his advanced schooling outstripped Mary's ability to keep him somewhat corralled and directed toward mastering segments of his advanced education. Well, Shin turned 15 in my 15th year in Earth plus 23 Kyoto. Mary had told me she had no idea what Shin was up to, He had directed Mary to buy some commercially available scientific equipment, and he installed them in the two-person schoolroom and spent a lot of time in there trying various experiments he didn't seem to care to share the results of. Mary told me that she was assuming Shin didn't share results because he knew she wouldn't understand it. I agreed and asked her to still keep an eye on him and report what she could to her people. Well, now we're going to start part 4. There's starting to be some action here. Pinky sat in her usual place at breakfast with Sharon, Shelley, and Gracie around the table. The new farm manager had finished his breakfast and had left the house already. The 4 of them talked about this and that as they enjoyed a second cup of coffee. The conversation abruptly stopped as they all assumed a position of attention. As one, they pulled out their comm units, placed them in the center of the table in a circle. As when Cheyenne showed them the 3D capabilities some months back, Shelley assumed the missing Cheyenne's command role, traced out a command on the top of her unit. The units all came alive and thin pencils of light coalesced into a figure in the air. It was the same figure as before. He began by greeting them all by name. He continued by saying it had been decided that Mac and his Kyoto family, which included Marie, would now be taken to Prime to continue their collective education and expose Shin to the technology available there. He said that he wanted us all to go henceforth to Kyoto and Earth plus 23 and accompany them all to Prime. He said that their duties would then be to spend the next several years there, to go to school with the Kyoto family to support Shin as he assembled his team. Prime said that the two families would form the nucleus of Shin's team in an attempt to discover a way to travel in the interstellar medium. Prime ended his presentation by saying he wanted us to go immediately to Kyoto on Earth plus 23 and inform Mac of what he had just asked us to do. He told us that Mac and Mary's comm units would play a similar message when we got to the house, and would serve to inform Mac's family part of what was going on. He asked us why we were still sitting here drinking coffee. He looked stern at them and then broke out into a wide smile and laughed out loud at his joke. He said to take her time, but he wanted us underway in an hour. He said the translator was already set to take them to the basement of Mac's house. He suggested we call out from the basement and then go upstairs into the breakfast room where they would all be assembled for their own breakfast. He told us that if we were nice, the Kyoto family might feed him again. Prime said goodbye and his figure faded away. Sharon spoke first, said that they might as well go get cleaned up and pack a short bag to take along. She said they could get new clothes as needed on Prime or in Kyoto. She said we'd leave in an hour. She ended with a curt, "Move it!" She stood up and moved quickly out the door, with Pinky and Gracie as Shelley ran up the stairs to the attic. At 55 minutes, they all stood in front of the now exposed translator door. They stood quietly as the door opened automatically at T-1 minute. They filed into the room and stood in the center circle. The door closed. And as they watched, the enable button activated and then was extinguished. Pinky said, "Well, I guess we're here." Pinky moved to the door and pushed it open to a dimly lit but spacious room that smelled of a little basement dampness. Just to let them know they had traveled a very long way here, Pinky yelled out, "Hey guys, we're here, and we're coming up." She led the four as they walked up the stairs. Well, by the time they reached the top of the stairs, they could see moving out of what they assumed to be the breakfast room Mac and a tall, good-looking Japanese fellow. Mac had his mouth open and then stammered, "What are you guys doing here?" Pinky stopped one stair down and looked up at him. She said, "We have some news, but we could use some coffee and breakfast if you have any left." Mac turned to Shin, and by now Mary, Mitsuko, and Seuss had joined the crowd. He turned to them and said that you won't believe what you are about to see and hear. He told them that these people are my other family. This is Pinky, Sharon, Shelley, and Gracie, as he pointed them out one by one. He turned to Mary and said that if you and Shin would be so kind, you can put the extra leaves in the table and prepare breakfast for these guests. He stepped to them and gave them all kisses and hugs as he greeted them one by one. Seuss and Mitsuko stood behind him, dumbfounded. They recovered quickly as they saw them being welcomed and how they greeted each other. As Mac released one, Seuss stepped forward and gave them all her own hugs. Mitsuko recovered as quickly and added her own touchy-feely. Amazing how it all seemed to be in an instant one big happy family. Mary and Shin came rushing out of the dining room, and as if rehearsed, they inserted themselves into the group, started their own round of hugs and kisses. As they grabbed one, each introduced themselves. In short order, Mary took charge and told them to put their bags against this wall here and follow me into the dining room. We all followed her as directed. She and Shin had brought the coffee machine into the room, and as we seated ourselves directed by Shin, she set coffee cups in front of each of us. Seuss could not wait to start asking questions, and her first was, "How did you guys get in here?" Pinky, being closest in age to her, answered truthfully. She said, "We came in through the basement translator unit." She told Seuss that she would show us all when Mac had filled him in on what was going on overall. Pinky said that you will probably not believe a tenth of what Mac is going to tell you, but believe me, it is all true. I have been exposed to this for many years now, and it is still hard for me to understand how all of it can be. She told him to be patient, and we will tell you all of the story. Well, Shin was sitting quietly in his seat. He moved a little and then spoke into the lull. He said, "It's me, isn't it?" You have come to take me somewhere, to provide me with the tools, finally to do what it is I seem to be destined to do. The table was silent as we all absorbed his statement. The Kyoto members of the team knew it was true, even without Mac's answer, which seemed to be slow in coming. Mac said, "Shin, you are absolutely correct. The time has come to move us all to another place, to be your support team as you assemble your own organization and team members to finally find what it is you search for." Mac himself sat quietly for a few seconds, looking at the tabletop, and then looked up and swung his gaze around at the people assembled. He said he hardly knew where to begin. Zeus said as he paused, "How about at the beginning?" Well, that broke the ice, and the laughter started softly at first and then heartily, finally fading out as we all waited for him to begin. "First things first," he said, "is to let you all know there is one of us that none of you know occupies a very special place in Shin's organization. You may not know this, but Shin is going to be the center of your universe for some years. Live with it. Second in command in his team is Mary." We all swung our gaze to Mary and then back to Mac. He continued, saying that Mary may actually be my superior, even as I tell you what the situation is. He said, "Mary is already part of our team that includes Pinky, Gracie, Shelley, and Sharon. Mary has a comm unit." At this news, the four of us from Earth -2 started. From what we had been told while Mac had been home with us from time to time, was that Mary was a simple tutor, not one of the people. What other news is there to come? "If I may," Pinky interrupted Mac, "just before we all left -2, we got a message from Prime. He told us that your and Mary's comm unit would have a similar message you could play when we all got together here. You may want to play that now." "Right," Mac responded. "Mary, let's do what Pinky suggests. Place your comm on the table with mine." And as he pulled his out of his pocket and placed it near the center of the table, Mary placed hers nearby and traced the start message command on her unit. The familiar figure appeared and played their original message. Instead of ending as they had seen just an hour or so ago, Prime continued. Prime looked at the table as the Kyoto families sat staring at the apparition before them. He started by naming and greeting the Kyoto family all by name, and said also to the -2 family that he was pleased we had all made good time on our trip. He gave us all greetings as a group and told us that Mac was in charge of the group as we translated to Prime and began our education in earnest in support of Shin and his efforts. He turned to Shin and said that all of Prime and her resources would be at his disposal as he completed his own journey of discovery and education. Prime turned to Mac and said that he would like to see us all in 1 week on Prime. He told Mac that he could spend up to a week telling the Kyoto family what was going on. He also told Mac how to access the necessary teaching devices to use during the week as the Kyoto family slept to eliminate unnecessary downtime in their crash course, bringing them all up to speed. He also informed them where the connecting corridor was to access the main facility in Kyoto. Well, that was actually some distance from Kyoto up in the mountains, but was accessible via the usual monorail and took just a few high-speed minutes to reach it. He told Mac that he wanted him to start taking the Kyoto family there to have the usual procedures done to enhance their learning capabilities and their gene manipulation, to preclude education and eliminate the possibility of disease. He said he would appreciate doing all this with due haste. He said that there were many reasons to advance the timeline of Shin's efforts that he would not go into at this time. He thanked them all personally again and then to the whole group. Prime ended his presentation and the figure faded away into an almost invisible ball and then winked out. Seuss said that it sounds like we're going to be busy for a while. An extended vacation or an extended period of intense work to support Shin, she concluded. Mac said it's going to be both. Shin looked at his dad and said, "What's Prime? Who was that person?" Mac explained that Prime is both a particular Earth and is also a title of the president, if you will, of that Earth. He said that that particular Earth's name in the great scheme of things is Earth Prime Zero. He told his Kyoto family that there were a total of 40 of these Earths in their own particular dimension that Earth Prime had contact with. He said that this particular Earth's name, where we are now, is Earth plus 23. He continued by saying that Pinky and the rest of his other family are from Earth minus 2. He added that there were 13 minus Earths and 26 plus Earths, for a total of 40, including Prime. Well, he paused and lifted his eyebrow to ask if there were any questions. None were asked, so he continued his explanation. He told the group as a whole that the scientists of Prime had the capability of translating to any of these Earths at any time and any place. Minus time translating is forbidden, but present zero time is allowed, as well as a continuing advancing timeline and a one-time future translation that became permanent zero time when executed. When a person translates back to their origin location, they came back at time zero. That resulted in a zero-time elapsed arrival at their origin location. He said that the translation effect is widely used on Prime for local and long-distance travel on the planet. That continuing translation travel is almost always done using the advancing timeline. That type of translation had not been implemented on any of the other 39 Earths due to the general embargo of scientific knowledge from Prime. Introduction of advanced science in this case is seen to be too disruptive, so it just wasn't done. Mac went to the next part of his discussion, which described the problem that Shin and his search hoped to solve. He told the group that the use of the translating effect in local traffic was in general use on Prime. He said that it had been found to work with equipment installed on the moon for travel by astronauts to and from there. The problem is that we don't have a way to get to any other solar system anywhere in the galaxy to install that translation equipment. He concluded by saying that's the crux of the problem. He said we need a technique and equipment to get us to the stars. We just haven't been able to come up with a way to do that. The scientists on Prime had been scouring all of the Earth for someone whose research project seemed to focus on this particular scientific conundrum. He said that Prime had developed a way to monitor scientific progress now and in the future world's timelines for progress toward the solution. He said that they had identified Shin as one who later in his life seemed to be edging closer to the solution than any of the other candidates. Shin was not observed to solve it, however, in his future timeline. Prime seems to think that if Shin and his immediate family are allowed access to the available advanced science on Prime, then he may solve it in our common altered timeline. Mac paused and asked Shin for comments. He had none. He simply said, "Continue, and all this is almost too fantastic to believe, but I'm all for it." Mac continued, he said that there's another part of the process of finding a technique for interstellar travel. He said that Prime had found out, indeed, that translating to the moon was possible, and in fact was in regular use to and from. He said the problem is getting a translator system to a planet or a location in another star system to see if it worked long distance. He said that Prime decided, in lieu of waiting out scientific progress, to build and launch a long-term, long-distance capable spacecraft and send it off to the Centauri system or to one of the Wolf planets. One of our own team members had volunteered to go on that trip and was by now well on his way. He said if Shin is successful, one of our outbound ships would attempt rendezvous with Mark's ship and bring him home, curtailing that centuries-long dead-end project. He said that an extraordinary effort had been made in ensuring that the current location of Spaceship Prime would always be known to several decimal places, and it was hoped this would ensure a timely recovery operation. The table got quiet as Mac took a break in his explanation lecture. He intended to continue by getting breakfast all cleaned up, taking all of his family from both Earths to the Prime installation in the mountains above Kyoto. He sat there sipping his fresh coffee Mary kept him supplied. She sat down to her own cup. Mary cleared her throat and simply said, "Shenandoah, Augustine 14. Pinky and the rest looked at Mary, and at least two of her group said, "What?" Sue, Shin, and Mitsuko looked like they had just been run over by a semi. Mac was on his feet and looked at Mary like she had just grown another head. "What have you done here, Mary?" Mary said for him to sit down and she would explain what was going on. Mac slowly returned to his seat. Mary told Sue, Shin, and Mitsuko to go get their comm units. Shin said for his family to stay seated, that he'd get them. Turned out there was a painting on the wall of the dining room that before today no one could remember ever taking note of. It had always been there, and no one but Mary had ever been allowed to touch it. They all knew instinctively not to fool with it. Shin stepped over to the picture and lifted it off the wall. Behind it was a simple door with a finger hole. Shin put his index finger in the hole and pulled it open easily. Within, nearly everyone at the table could see several comm units laying on its internal shelves. Shin picked up 3, closed the door, and then replaced the picture. Shin made sure the painting was straight and level. Mary then spoke as Shin gave one of the units in his hand to his sister and one to his mother. Mary explained that very early in her time with Mitsuko, Seuss, and Shin that she had hypnotized Seuss and Mitsuko and subsequently had them wear the teaching devices to bed for many weeks. The hypnotic technique she used allowed her to cause her 2 subjects to forget they were ever subjected to the subliminal education. She implanted the password phrase and didn't do any more after that process. She said she used a similar technique with Shin, as it seemed to work well even though he wasn't even able to talk yet. She whispered the code phrase to him once, and never again until now. Mary ended by saying that when Mac was ready, he could take them all to the Prime installation. She said by now, Seuss, Shin, and Mitsuko have come to grips with their new knowledge and are ready to begin the next phase. Well, Mac said, "Mary, you surprised me no end. I'll be forever in your debt for your intervention in our lives. You have saved us much time." Pinky started softly clapping her hands. That spread, and everybody at the table joined in, including Shin. The applause was for all of us, like a very, very secret society only we knew about. So began the process of group education that ended 1 week later with all the group crowded into the translation system room, and with Shin doing the honors, pushed the enable button. He released it. He said, "Did it work? What happened? We haven't moved." With a serious frown, Max said, "Well, we better go get on our comm units and find out what happened." Pinky was standing by the door and, unsuccessfully stifling a grin, opened the door to a very spacious arrival hall in gleaming white, with translator doorways opening and closing as far as one could see around the enormous room. People were sauntering here and there, going on their way. In a group, waiting in front of their arrival door, was a small group of Prime people, including Prime President Jorge Simons, and some of his staff we would all come to know well in the months and years ahead. We filed out of the room, and the president waded into the center, started shaking hands, and then, abandoning that, started grabbing and hugging with delight. He centered on Shin and said that he was very happy to finally meet him in person. He said to Shin that he had the run of the place and a teaching tape had been prepared for him personally to educate him on prime science, technology, and laboratory capabilities. President Simons told him that his personal comm unit number has been enabled in your comm unit, and that he encouraged him to call often to let him know of anything he could help with. Well, the president then told him he had to go. He called a young group of people to the front and said that these people would be assigned to each of them to show them around and take them to their housing. Like a whirlwind, the president left with his staff all trying to keep up. We noticed a large door opened on the outside wall to an expansive translator unit, and they all moved inside. Their door closed, and attendants moved to put small devices in front. After that, no one entered the fenced-off area, which now became apparent to be dedicated to high-level personnel. I asked the new guide group who was in charge. A young girl of maybe 20 stepped forward and said, "I'm it." She was really good-looking with sparkling white teeth. In fact, every person I had met associated with Prime had sparkling, perfect teeth. I grabbed her and enfolded her in my arms, gave and received a whole-body hug. She pulled back and then moved to kiss me on the lips. Well, perfect. As I stood there with her in my arms, I saw Pinky headed for a tall guy in the group. I saw she walked right up to him, and he met her with gusto. I don't have to tell you that the rest of our group soon paired off with the member of the guide group of the opposite sex. I thought we were off to a good start. I asked my new guide what her name was. She said, Sardonia. She finished by saying I could call her Donia if I liked. I said I liked Donia. She gave me a huge smile and gave me another kiss. I heard Gracie nearby say to Shelley that Mac has someone else to share his affection. I had to join them as they laughed, while Donia picked up on the innuendo instantly. She was still in my arms as she laughed with us. She turned to me and said that she was game if I was. I said, "You're on." No trouble communicating on Prime, and that's for sure. Well, I found out later that Pinky, while she was resident on Prime in her other life, had actually met and lived with a Prime resident whose name was Prandar. He was the one that came with the young group to act as escorts in our early times on Prime. Pinky wound up living nearby with Prandar. He was called Pran for short. Donia got us all together and asked us all to follow her. She led us outside the building and all got on this presumably electrically driven shuttle vehicle as when it pulled away from Transport Central on its embedded tracks, there was only wheel noise. About 10 minutes later, in some parts underground and some above ground, as we moved to the outskirts of the city, the vehicle slowed to a stop at what seemed to be a much smaller transport hub in a local community. This station was underground. I asked Donia what the name of the city was, and Where in the country of what I knew presumably to be the United States? Donia said that indeed the government and the nation was called the United States of America, and this metropolis was called Phoenix. Our destination city was a local university town named Tembe. Well, I thought that certainly showed us that Earth minus 2 had indeed developed somewhat like Prime. It's only 2 numbers different. She continued saying the state here was named Azondo. I told her I was going to have to develop a cheat sheet to keep track of all the different names. She said that I should be patient, as there was already a solution for my question. Well, we'd moved up a wide stairs from the station platform to a wide circular area with lawn in the middle, surrounded by a wide street which led off to the south. The central area of what seemed to be several acres in area had various picnic and gazebo areas for use by occupants. Outside the circle of pavement sat various houses that seemed to be the nucleus of a neighborhood, secluded by trees, and in the distance showed what seemed to be a guarded and gated entrance to the community. Donia led us all into what looked like a community center building and had us seat ourselves in the center of the circular structure. She held up a hand for silence. She began, "You people from -2 and +23 need some initial guidance to come up to speed quickly in your duties as Shin staff. First thing is to get you all the device we call our pawn. This is what you know as a smartphone. Here it is simply our pawn. You wear it all day and only take it off if you purposely take yourself off the grid. We have representatives from A&P Ponics Incorporated to get yours enabled. You will find out exactly how to use it, care for it, tonight as you sleep connected to your learning device. We call this learning titanium. A&P Ponics is short for Antic and Pixif Incorpt. She assured us that by tomorrow morning we will be using all these new terms with ease. For ease of translation, quote, we will be using these new terms interchangeably in this construction of this Shin Drive history. Well, from here to the end of the afternoon session, we were assigned pawns and assigned homes in the community. Mac, Shin, Sus, and Marie were in the largest home, and the rest in close proximity. Each house had a backyard pool with an expansive lounging area intended for familiar entertaining, as people mostly came by unannounced to visit. That is, before 2000 hours. None of those sorts of visits were tolerated after 2000. After that, until 0800, unannounced visits were not allowed. 12 hours of the day were considered private family time. Of course, if a party or family-centered event was taking place, the time restraints were totally ignored. This party time was called a blotto event. Azondo had no restrictions on alcoholic beverage consumption. A complete lack of concern about juvenile or pre-adolescent consumption, we found out, led to a near complete lack of alcohol abuse. For the kids, no limits at all actually resulted in minimal consumption in the first place. Gracie, Shelley, Sharon, and sometimes Pinky occupied the adjacent home, which was nearly as big as the one where Mac and his family resided. Turned out Mac was sometimes invited to stay the night when family events were held in either one or the other. In most cases, this quiet family time seemed to be equally divided between houses. Well, Shin found himself picked up at 0800 for his training and education. He came home most times about 1800 with tapes to do his tutaining with. While Mac and Pinky found themselves with vehicles quickly. Later, most of the others did the same. In the area were found myriad food stores and other shops. Like home, in fact, and in a lot of cases, there didn't seem to be much change except for the names of things, which seemed to be somewhat familiar if overall strangeness were ignored. Money was not a problem, as the 8 of them were also issued money cards, with seemingly no limit imposed. Donia addressed this by saying that all the money was due to Shin's research project, which he performed assiduously and promptly. As staff, we were also reimbursed at Shin's rate. She explained this as saying that in a lot of cases, the return on investment on these sorts of projects were enormous and immediate. She also told them in more than one of the group sessions in the clubhouse that there were more than 50 of these sorts of efforts going on at the present time. She said that it was a significant source of wealth for the government, which included the local and state and federal government. The initial source of resources to fund these projects were provided by the federalists. Well, Mac, Mitsuko, Mary, and Seuss were sitting in the family room one evening late, waiting for Shin to come home. He had called and said one of the other staff in his project had invited him home with her for supper. I'm wondering if I want to actually talk about this. I've only got 12 minutes to go. I'm going to end this one because this next little segment, to me, is like just intensely personal, and it doesn't have an awful lot to do with the project, but in the long run, it probably played an enormous part of the Shin Odyssey. So, thank you all for being here. I'll see you next time.